Hello, shallots and ramps. Today, we're going to look at this MSI Radeon HD 7970 Twin Frzor 3 and look what we can do to refreshing this 8-year-old video card. Because of the current climate, it's tough to get a decent video card. This video card, this fan is dead. It's not controllable by the video card, and this one seems to be on its way out. To give you an example of that, I have a shotgun microphone that's currently picking me up speaking to you. And then we have this omnidirectional lavalier microphone sitting in front of the video card, right in front between the two fans. Now this video card is known for coil whine when it's under load, but you should still be able to hear the fan being irregular as we do a couple benchmark tests. So now I'm going to mix in the lavalier omnidirectional microphone. We're going to get power to this test bench. Now we're using a pretty new test bench because I want to make sure that this PCI Express 3.0 capable video card is actually running at that speed so that our benchmarks show us the most about the card. We're going to start this and you'll be able to hear how this fan sounds when this starts up cold. This started up when we first had power, and then it just gives up. And no matter what, this won't turn back on. So we're loaded up here in Windows 10 20H2. I have a hardware monitor and GPU-Z set up to watch this during testing. Now one of the things that I want to check is this card actually running at PCI X16 3.0. You have to do something graphically, otherwise power optimization will make it not run at PCI Express 3.0 speeds. So GPU-Z will do that if you just run a render test. So now because it's doing 3D stuff, we see the bus interface that's capable of X16 3.0 is in fact running at X16 3.0. And this card supports DirectX 12, and so we'll benchmark it with that. You can probably hear the fans making some different noise now that there's a little bit of some GPU render load on here. And then if we stop it, so I'm going to set up these sensors so we can watch this. Now we see the GPU temperature is at 55, so I'm using Radeon drivers 21.4. I want to get the monitoring from it, so let's turn on the Radeon monitoring overlay. Now I'm going to take note here. The GPU-Z temperature sensor says it's at 52C. We're going to run this 3D Mark TimeSpy DirectX 12 benchmark and see what kind of score we get. I'm going to leave this microphone on to see how bad the fan gets when the tests really get going here. As you can see, this system, it has a bunch of RAM, and it's actually a Threadripper system, so there should be no bottlenecking of the system bus or the CPU in testing this 7970. So I'm going to start the test. you should be able to hear the irregular fan spinning separate from the coil whine. Okay, the test is over. As the GPU comes down in temp, you can start to hear the fan being more irregular. So this score of 2647 is pretty much, it's right there at the average. I've run this test several times. So let's refresh this card and see if we can't get more out of it. Here's the fan we're going to use. Now, this is a PowerLogic PLD 08010S12HH fan. And the listing also says that it's for twin Frzor 3s. Now it doesn't say 7970, but I know the 7800s and 7900s, the form factors were the same. So this should be good. Let's get this card off the test bench. And we'll see how it comes apart. Make sure you remember to release the card from the board by pushing PCI Express lever. Okay, we got the card off the test bench. Let's see how we take this apart. So this particular, the twin Frzor 3 card, there are various screws, but these screws are for heat sinks and brackets that are attached to the reference board. So technically what we need to do is we need to be able to change this fan. So the fan is attached to the main heatsink with these screws. And the fan wire is routed along here to the back of the card. Because we're refreshing this card and because it seems to make it easier, we want to take the fan cover off. So the fan cover we have this screw here. The way this should come apart, if we take off the heatsink screws, the heatsink and the fans and the fan cover should come off together. So let's do that. I'm going to unplug this fan cable. And then when we take this apart, it should separate. I'm just going to loosen each one. So now they're all loose. So now if we take out these screws, the heatsink and fan assembly should come off. Now we might have to twist it a little bit depending on the condition of the paste between the heatsink and the GPU. So the screw and the spring came out. The spring was just kind of embedded in this rubber gasket. So let's see if they're still really joined together. Nope, not really. The paste seems to be in fair shape for something that was released 8 years ago. So this is probably 7 or 8 years old. So I'm gonna get rid of this paste with a shop towel. And then once we get all the paste out of here, we'll wipe it with alcohol before we put it back together. I got the extra bits of thermal paste, some of the more dry stuff, out with the small end of this plastic pick and pry tool. So now we can focus on getting the fan switched out on the heatsink assembly. As I noted before, I saw these two screws we could see with the card before the card was taken apart. But to be able to get this bracket off, these screws, looks like there's just these 4 that hold it on. There's no way we were going to get to these unless we took this off. So looking at the way these wires route, it's going to be really hard to change these fans unless we also take the heatsink off so we can get to these screws. So I'm going to keep using my Phillips 0. It seems to be right. I'm going to loosen each of the screws, and then we're going to take each of the screws out and watch out for anything else that we need to take off or move around. Okay, without those 4 screws on there, does this just come apart? Yeah. These fans, there's a lot of hours on this card. I think the fans just got tired. So now we have the heatsink and fan assembly without the cover. So the fans are held on with 3 screws each. And there's this aluminum bracket that the fans are on, and then the fan control and power wire is under these loops of this aluminum bracket. Now I can bend these, but you can only bend stuff like soft metal so many times, then it's going to break off. So there are screws that are holding this aluminum bracket onto this chromed heatsink. So let's take these screws, and then this bracket should come off on each side. I'm going to do one first because they're separate. We're just going to do one first. We're going to confirm the part number, and we'll switch to this fan, and we'll get it under this bracket. So this bracket is free. Let's confirm our part number here. We got the PowerLogic DC brushless PLD 08010S12HH. Says the same thing, you know, brushless fan, long life bearing, 12 volts, 0.35 amps. Pretty confident what we got is the same. Let's get that guy out. So the layout of these fans looks to be about the same. If we just see, do these line up? Are we going to be able to mount this in the same way? Yeah, the lengths look like it's going to allow for that. So the new fan, the old fan. This fan doesn't have a manufacture date, but it looks new and is marked in all the same ways, but like some of these markings aren't exactly the same size, so I'm hoping that this is newer production. So I'm going to switch this fan on the bracket, and that will make sure that I don't lose any parts and I get this bracket fan on in the same way. So if we remember, it was on this way, and it was under this bracket. So we want to make sure it's under there when we put it back together. This here. So I turn this back over and get at these screws through the fan blades. If we make sure of the orientation as we take it apart, we'll have a better chance of getting the new one in the same way. So I see that the power goes behind this tab and then comes down. So let's make sure we do the same thing as we separate the bracket. So we take this and we're going to make sure that we're coming through the same way, like this. Okay, that looks right. So we got a screw, and let's line up that screw hole. Okay, we got that screw started. And the other screw holes are pretty close. All right, we got all the screws started. So now I'm going to tighten them all. So let's make sure that this bracket is still the way the other one was. Yeah. So we can put this back on now. Let's just make sure that this is under this loop. And the brackets are inside this first fin. So we should be able to reinstall these screws. Just going to get a couple turns on each one. And before we tighten this, let's make sure that this cable isn't getting smashed in the bracket. Looks like there's room in there. Okay, I'm going to get these other two screws started. All right, now we're done with this bracket. Let's make sure that's not being smashed. Nope. So now, take off this guy. Same way. I'm going to loosen each of the screws first. I want to take note here. This wire goes under the bracket, and both the wires should come from here. Both branches go under this bracket, and then this one goes in here and behind this finger, similar to the other one. Let's lay this out so we can just get an easy transfer. Yeah, that looks right. That looks like that's the minimal amount of twists if we do it like this. So leave that like that. I'm going to take these screws out. So if we do it like this, this was the least amount of twist in the branches of the wire. And then we make sure we get this guy behind this finger. Yeah. Let's make sure this screw is started. Okay, yeah, now it's biting. So let's make sure we route this the same. This part of the wire is supposed to be retained by this bracket. And then all of the wire is supposed to be retained by this outermost bracket loop. I'm going to make sure the bracket's behind these fins. Well, that looks okay. I want to try to pull this something like this. Now this is one of the mounting holes for the cover. So why don't we leave this like this. Get this assembled. This over here seems to make the most sense. This is this new stiff sheathing on this wire. So the bottom is lined up, so let's do that one first. So before we tighten the top where the wires go, let's make sure we're in the desired positions and we're not pinching any wires. Okay, so now these line up if I just push these in a little bit. Yep. Okay, we got that one started. Okay. So now we'll tighten these. So this cover goes on like this. Looks like if we do that, the wire will stay out of the way, but we want to make sure we don't get, that doesn't get pinched whenever we put that in. And that one, because I'm going at an angle, is going in at an angle. I don't like that. So I'm loosening it, backing it off. I'll just show you this way. So I loosen it to back it off, and then once I hear the threads start to engage, then to go forward. Now that's going in straight. I can prevent some cross-threading here because the cover is what's threaded, and I think it might all be aluminum, judging by the weight, and it'd be much better to not strip it. I got those others in there tightened. Got this tightened. Yeah. Okay. So now we have the two halves. They're just about ready to go back together. If we, since we have this apart, if we just inspect this, see if any voltage regulators or anything else seems off, looks pretty good. So before we apply this thermal paste, let's clean these surfaces a little better. Just going to use some alcohol here. I got some thermal compound here. We really don't need a lot to have this. Thermal compound will spread a bunch. So let's just get a good P in the middle here. So the best way I figure to put this together is actually to put the card on the sink. Now if we line up these holes, and they do have a shoulder to these holes, it should come down on it nicely. So let's give that a try. Okay, we've landed on all the shoulders. So let's put these screws with these springs back in. Now we're just going to start each one first. Once I feel it start, I'm not going to do any more. Okay. I'm also going to do this in a crisscross pattern similar to installing automobile wheels. Okay, that's started. Yeah, that's started. So each of them is just started. So now I'm going to do 2 half turns on each one at a time to make sure that we pull down onto this evenly. Okay, so now they're starting to max out. So I'm just going to tighten them until each is starting to feel tight. Okay, now we're just going to do just a little bit more. So then that amount of tightening plus the spring should stay in position. So let's not forget to plug the fan back in. If you look at the fan plug, it only goes in one way on this particular board. The center pin alignment goes towards the outside. Now I'm just going to pull this loose a little bit like this so it stays away from the heatsink. So let's get this back in there and see if the fans spin and then see if performance is any better. Okay, we got this put back together. Now we have the omnidirectional microphone back between the fans of the video card like we had before, and it's already turned on. So we have the shotgun and the omnidirectional microphone listening again. So let's start the board and see what stuff sounds like. And also take note if these fans start or stop at all. Now for me sitting 2 feet in front of it, that was a very uniform start for both of the fans. So we're back in a test install of Windows 10 20H2. We haven't changed the Radeon drivers or anything. So similar to before, let's do the same stuff so we can, because right now the GPU temperature is at 35°C. I think that has, no, that's a lot cooler because we weren't really seeing it below 50 before. So let's make sure of the bus speed in a similar way, and that's going to get a little bit of temperature on the GPU. See it rising, it's at 41, 42°C. I'm not sure how high it's going to rise with just this render test, because this is not a stress or benchmark test. It's just render things that are 3D. Now we're inching towards 50°C. And we do see we are running at X16 3.0. So let's get Radeon overlay turned on so that we can monitor in the same way we did before. So it's dropping. It was at 42, now it's going back to 41, 40. So So it certainly seems like it's running cooler than before. So while we're waiting for 3D Mark to load, I'm just going to point out that the GPU, it's hovering at 40C. So I'm optimistic this is going to run better than before. And now it's just went back to 38. So same system, same graphics driver, same Windows 10 20H2. So we're going to run Time Spy, and let's see if we note any differences in temperatures or FPS. Now, right when this starts, let's see how much the coil whine is in comparison. From my perspective sitting here, the coil whine seems to be about the same. So performance is pretty much, that might even be the same number as before. Let's compare these. So if we compare this to the last few times I did this, the 3D Mark score was very close. In fact, one of those runs before was the same 2643 overall number. So what we can see though, same driver, the average clock was the same. The memory clock was the same. Now the average temperature in the previous test was 72°C. And that really seemed like too hot. As you can see right now, things have calmed down. It's been several minutes since the test. And the GPU probe says 38°C. So on this most recent run we just did, it was 56°C. Average temperature. Now I'm sure a lot of that has to do with actually having both of the fans now. But since we had to take it apart anyway to do the fans, I'm glad we did the thermal paste, because I haven't done the thermal paste on this before. As you saw, that warranty sticker on the one screw had not been broken through yet. So we've refreshed this graphics card. So now I feel comfortable running it in this system to be able to get some work done that I need to. Before I was worried that it was just going to get too hot. Now I'm not really going to do graphic-centric stuff, but I was worried about the other fan not spinning and this one making weird noises at certain RPM. If you need to tune up your own video card to get through the shortage, you may need to do the same thing, but most video cards are pretty easy to take apart, and the fans are marked with their models, or at least their specs, so you can go find the same thing. Hopefully you can do the same on yours.